For those who think the Great Reset is not going to control every aspect of your life, let me give you a couple of things. They are now taking the next step to shape global, regional, and industry agendas, end quote, with a new digital ID system. Under the framework, the WEF proposes collecting data from many aspects of people's everyday lives. That's a quote. Through their devices, telecommunication networks, and third-party service providers. The WEF suggests that this data collection dragnet would allow a digital ID. Now listen to this. It's very narrow. It would allow a digital ID to scoop up data on people's online behavior, purchase history, network usage, credit history, biometrics, names, national identity numbers, and medical history. Plus your travel history, social accounts, e-government accounts, bank accounts, energy uses, health stats, education, and I love this one, and more. What's left? Once the digital ID has access to this huge, highly personal set of data, the WEF proposes using it to decide whether users are allowed to, quote, own and use devices, quote, open bank accounts, quote, carry out online financial transactions, quote, conduct business transaction, quote, access insurance and treatment, book trips, still quoting, go through border control between countries or regions, still quoting, access third-party services that rely on social media logins, file taxes, vote, collect benefits, end quote. So, you know that passport that they gave you? It was so crazy to think that maybe that COVID passport might grow into something, exactly like this.
What is ID 2020? Well, you can go to the ID2020.org homepage of the ID 2020 Alliance to find out more, where if you go to their homepage, you'll see they start by telling you that we need to get digital ID right. And they will explain more about that in their talk here. So since 2016, ID 2020 has advocated for ethical, privacy-protecting approaches to digital ID. And then it goes on to give a lot of the same spiel that Gruner was just giving there. But if you go to the About page, you can see that they have a manifesto. So let's click on over to that and pick up on what sorts of things they're telling us in this manifesto. For example, the Alliance Manifesto, number 1, the ability to prove one's identity is a fundamental and universal human right. Now, I want to pick up on that phrase, which you will see parroted everywhere by all of the people who are pushing for this digital ID agenda. They always point to this idea that the ability to prove your identity is a human right. And when they lead you down that garden path, it makes a certain logic. There's a certain logic to it. It makes sense, at least when they put it in a certain framework. Well, you have to have the ability to prove who you are so that then you can access the government services and other things that are predicated on that identity. There's a sense to it, but as I will get into more later, that is actually probably where the fundamental deception begins. Number 2, we live in a digital era. Individuals need a trusted, verifiable way to prove who they are, both in the physical world and online. Number 3, over 1 billion people worldwide are unable to prove their identity through any recognized means. As such, they are without the protection of law and are unable to access basic services, participate as a citizen or voter, or transact in the modern economy. Most of those affected are children and adolescents, and many are refugees, forcibly displaced, or stateless persons. Won't somebody think of the children? Won't somebody think of the poor? This is, I think, the key thrust of the way that Gruner started that presentation and introduced the subject to people. Yes, it's very easy for you, rich, privileged white person living in the Western developed world with your driver's license and passport and what have you, but think of how hard it is for the poor people who don't have access to those types of documents. But this raises the question, wait, ID 2020? Who is this? What is this? What is this alliance? What are they talking about? So if you go to their main About page, they will say quite simply, the ID 2020 Alliance is setting the course of digital ID. ID 2020 is coordinating funding for identity and channeling these funds towards high-impact projects, enabling diverse stakeholders, UN agencies, NGOs, governments, and enterprises to pursue a coordinated approach that creates a pathway for efficiency and responsible implementation at scale. All right. And then, okay, well, whatever, blah, 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 it's principles, da, 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 da. Oh, who comprises this alliance? Who are the alliance partners? Alliance partners include, and here is a list of, I guess, what they take to be the highlights of the ID 2020 Alliance. And some of these, I think, will be well familiar to my audience by now. Everyone knows Microsoft, and everyone in the conspiracy realist world knows about the Rockefeller Foundation and its infamous history. There are other organizations in here that you may not have heard of, but probably should. I mean, for example, how about Simprints? Every person counts. What is that? Well, if you go to simprints.com, you can find out that our biometric solution will help you tackle your greatest impact challenges. So helping the poor people of the world get scanned into their smartphones and taking the digital ID photographs and fingerprints. And, oh, it'll be so great. Tools and services for holistic support. Oh, you gotta love how they frame these types of things. So they provide mobile software, biometric ID, project configuration, project management, training materials, data analytics, and privacy and data security provided by your thumbprint or your iris scan or whatever you're looking for. What a wonderful organization. So I would put this forward as a research project for the budding young researchers in the crowd. I think every single one of these organizations and its connection to the ID 2020 Alliance and what it gets out of it and what it puts into it is probably an entire, well, podcast-worthy thing in and of itself. So if there are any researchers in the crowd who are interested, I would suggest tackling some of these bodies and groups. But one in particular that we can highlight right away that hopefully will be familiar to the Corbett Report audience is Gavi, the Bill and Melinda Gates co-founded Vaccine Alliance, which is seeking to create healthy markets for big pharma manufacturers to manufacture and distribute vaccines around the world. Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Now, how do they connect into the digital ID agenda? In order to understand the broader population control agenda and how it ties into the Gates Foundation's plans, we have to look at a puzzling development that took place in 2017. In that year, Gavi, the Gates-founded and funded alliance that partners the Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, and the World Bank with vaccine manufacturers to help ensure healthy markets for vaccines, took a strange pivot away from its core mission of vaccinating every child on the planet to providing every child with a digital biometric identity. The idea was first floated by Gavi CEO Seth Berkley in a Nature article that year, Immunization Needs a Technology Boost, where he states that the goal of 100% immunization will not be reached without secure digital identification systems that can store a child's medical history. He then gives a specific example. We are working with a company in India called Kushi Baby, which creates off-grid digital health records. A necklace worn by infants contains a unique identification number on a short-range communication chip. Community health workers can scan the chip using a mobile phone, enabling them to update a child's digital record even in remote areas with little phone coverage. This sudden interest in digital identity was no mere passing fancy for the Vaccine Alliance. Gavi doubled down by becoming a founding member of the ID 2020 Alliance, a public-private partnership dedicated to spearheading a global digital biometric identity standard. Other founding members of the alliance include Gates' first company, Microsoft, and the Rockefeller Foundation. In 2018, Gavi issued a call for innovation in digital technologies for finding, identifying, and registering the most vulnerable children. The call specifically requested technologies for capturing, storing, and enrolling the biometric details of infants on rugged biometric devices. Berkeley continued to follow up on this idea in public engagements as one of the new core missions of Gavi.
What's interesting is that people tend to think of, birth certificates as kind of a major document, but, the most common, as I mentioned before, is not a birth certificate, is not a death certificate, is not a marriage certificate. The most common connection, vital registration for the population is actually a child health card, because we reach more than 90% of children with at least one dose of vaccine as part of routine. So they're in the system. The challenge is that contact is not connected into the system. So if you could connect it, then you you have the ability to give them their basic identity papers. You have ability then later on, if they want to own land or they want to have their rights, you're able to help them with that. But, we're not currently taking advantage of that. And so the children get seen, they get enrolled in the health centers, but that information is not used for anything else.
Ah, yes. Now you're starting to see how this starts to connect into the greater agenda that is being pushed right now. And yes, if you have not watched or rewatched Who is Bill Gates recently, I suggest you go back and do so, at the very least, for the purposes of today's conversation, part 3 on Bill Gates and the population control grid, where I lay out piece by piece, step by step, how the digital ID ties into the vaccination push, and how the vaccination push and the digital ID become a vaccine passport, which can then be tied into broader national identification systems, like the Bill Gates-backed Indian Aadhaar biometric ID system, which can then be nexused into the digital currency push that we are seeing right now. And every single thread of this great reset tapestry that is being woven right now by the Gateses and the Schwabs and all of the other would-be superclass globalists are connected through this nexus point of digital ID. This is the linchpin of the coming Great Reset, transhumanist, fourth industrial revolution, merging of biological, digital, physical identities, new world order, whatever they're calling it this week, that is being constructed right now. And of course, as you saw in the Who is Bill Gates documentary, that of course that ends up with none other than Bill Gates himself telling us what a wonderful thing it is to go in and create broad national identification systems.
Every country really needs to look through these KYC, Know Your Customer rules, to make sure that customers are able to prove who they are. But, of course, in many countries, you don't have any type of ID system. And the lack of an ID system is a problem, not just for the payment system, but also for voting and health and education and taxation. And so it's a wonderful thing to go in and create a broad identification system. Again, India is a very interesting example of this, where the Aadhaar system, which is a 12-digit identifier that's correlated to biometric measures, is becoming pervasive throughout the country and will be the foundation for how we bring this low-cost switch to every mobile phone user in India. The same type of thing is happening now in Pakistan, and there's early beginnings of creating these ID programs in Africa as well. We expect to be able to use the ID so that when you show up for any government service, say you walk into a primary health clinic, we'll be able to take that bio-ID very quickly and bring up your electronic health record. Even if you've moved from one part of the country to the other, you will be well tracked and well served without nearly as much paperwork or waiting. And so the ID system is foundational.
Ah, yes, what could possibly go wrong with having our digital identities tied into national and, of course, eventually global digital ID grids that will then also be tied into our digital currencies and payments and proving ourselves to the banks and what have you? What could possibly go wrong? It probably doesn't need to be spelled out for you why this is such an important part of the coming nightmare totalitarian panopticon system that is being erected in the digital world for our digital identities in the near future. But let's go through that. Let's set some of the table here so that we understand the enormity of the behemoth which we are confronting, that is not being forwarded by any one particular government or corporation or financial institution or NGO, but all of them working together in concert have been working on this for years now, behind the scenes, and most people have no idea. Oh yeah, there's some sort of new ID that's rolling out, whatever. I'll just go and get mine and then I'll use it wherever it's asked for in whatever way. Why do we have to think about this? So again, they're already putting the loopholes, stipulations, and fine print in the back door of these white papers that no one in the general public is going to read anyway about the system that they're constructing, and saying, look, guys, we got entire organizations working on this, alliances, NGOs, corporations, some of the biggest names and most smart people on the most smart people on the planet are working on it, so you don't have to. Don't worry about it, guys. And look, we've thought about everything and when and where and how these different things can be. Anyway, just turn on whatever the default settings are on your device and just go. That is the way it will inevitably be presented to people, and anyone who is a holdout or resists this is not just going to be breaking the laws that will eventually require us to present our digital ID in various forms and to various so-called authorities in various situations, but we will be bad people. Because you think of all the poor, starving young children and refugees and whoever else needs these types of systems. So let's get to that point, because I think that is the underlying philosophical point, which is the real basis for this, that we have to interrogate if we're going to talk about this in a more thoroughgoing manner. So let's turn to those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, which we all know about, right? I don't know what it's like in whatever neck of the woods you happen to be living in, but I can tell you in Japan, the SDGs are becoming a thing. And you see these little colorful boxes all over the place, including even on advertisements for most products and services. They'll have the little boxes in the corner to let you know which SDGs this product or service or whatever they're advertising is in support of, and whatever cockamamie excuse they have for trying to fit that in, who knows, who cares? No one, I don't think anyone really stops and considers it carefully. It's just there to constantly remind you about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we're all working towards this, guys, right? So I would imagine, probably like 99% of people, you've probably heard of the Sustainable Development Goals by now, but probably, if you're like 99% of the population, have you read them? Whatever. Details, schmetails. It's just helping the earth or something. And yeah, if you go to the sdgs.un.org/goals site where they introduce the goals to, yeah, you can basically get that sort of back of the cereal box version of this. So it just says, goal number 1, no poverty. Hey, sounds good. Number 2, zero hunger. Hey, number 3, good health and well-being. That sounds great. mRNA vaccines, whatever. Quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable. I like good things too. All right, go UN. I wonder if there are any devils hiding in these details. Let's find out. So let's take a look at number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I get that peace and justice are things that most people inherently, naturally, those are just buzzwords that are standing in for good things. Strong institutions. I don't know about you. Maybe I'm just cynical after 15 years of doing the Corbett Report, but even that phrase does not sound good to me. I imagine draconian governmental tyranny when I hear the phrase strong institutions, but that's just me, right? All right, well, let's click on to Goal 16 and find out more about this goal and what it's purporting to do. Goal 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Well, what does that actually mean? What are the targets and indicators for this goal? So, for example, target 16.1, significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere. All right, okay. Less death. Okay. 16.2, end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children. Hey, I'm not in favor of torture of children either. I guess I'm on board with this agenda. 16.3, promote the rule of law at the national and international levels and ensure equal access to justice for all. Again, I understand the way Joe Normie would read that phrase, and they would generally be in support of that. I have, obviously, different ideas, I think, than a lot of people about what that means, law at the national and international levels. Hey, I've done an entire podcast on international law and what that really means. 16.4, by 2030, significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flow. Illicit financial flow. I wonder what that would look like in reality. Maybe something like what just happened in Canada, right? Illicit funds to those those insurrectionist truckers, right? 16.5, substantially reduce corruption and bribery. 16, develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. Ensure response, blah, blah, blah. Yes, feel good pap. Yay, wonderful. All right. Oh, but 16.9, let's look at this one. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. Again, to the average person reading this in a decontextualized way, that sounds wonderful. What does that really mean, though? How is the UN going to steward over a process that's going to make sure that everyone on Earth is provided legal identity? One of the indicators, the only indicator listed here, proportion of children under 5 years of age whose births have been registered with a civil authority by age. So as long as governments around the world are making sure that their human cattle are properly tagged and identified and issued a barcode at birth, then, hey, good. We can reach this wonderful goal. Which, let's go back to the way that Dakota Gruner was putting it in that opening clip from today. This isn't just a good thing. It's a human right. It is a right to be able to prove your identity so that then you can access government services and functions. This isn't something that they are providing to you that you can choose or not choose. This isn't something that they are offering. No. This is something that you should be demanding. This is a human right to prove your identity. But let's think about the implications of that. Essentially, what it is saying is that these institutions and structures and services and other things that are structured around us having to provide a document in order to prove we are who we say we are, in order to access or to travel or to do anything. Now, let's think about this in the context of, say, let's put ourselves in the mindset of pre-industrial society, when none of this existed. National identification systems, passports, all of these things, credit cards, whatever, all of these documents and tokens and this is my identity. None of that existed. How did human society function before that point? This is the world that we are being asked to not only accept, but actively desire. We need to prove our identity with some document that is being developed by an ID 2020 alliance that no one even knows who they are or what they're doing or reads their white papers or particularly cares about their discussions. It'll all just be handed to you, and you should want it. This is a human right, I tell you, and the UN is going to help provide this. Anyway, I think by this point, only the asleepest of the asleep, the sleepiest of the sleepiest, could possibly not understand the incredible danger of stepping into this digital ID reality. So I guess at the basic, absolute, fundamental level of this, the philosophical level, which is what the solution side of things always comes back down to, again, any institution, governmental framework, whatever, that requires us as natural, free human beings born as sovereign individuals into this world, that the idea that we now have to access and register and have our entire lives put on some sort of ledger or something in order to then just to live our lives, just to be human beings in the world, that doesn't speak to a problem with the identification system that we have now, and it's not good enough, and we need to create a new. No, that speaks to a problem with the very concept of the institutions and the institutional framework that we are being born into. You are not born a free human being in this world anymore. You cannot simply be a human being. You now have to register and be barcoded and scanned and put into a document, and here, this is me. And now you are being, in a key sense, reduced down to a number, and that number will then be encoded into your chip, inserted into your body, and eventually you will be the number, not the human being. And that is the fundamental problem going on here, so I think we need to address it at that level. But more practically, we are born in this system. It is here. It is not going to disappear overnight. So our role in this is to, in every way, shape, and form we can, at every point, to, as I think Ernest Hancock has put it before on Declare Your Independence, to be a butthead and to say no and to not provide the ID that is required of us for this or that. And the more that people actively resist and do not comply, the more we can at the very least put the sticks in the wheels of this bicycle as it goes along to hopefully stop the bike from going. And more importantly, as always, we need to be building up the parallel economy that does not require digital identification in order to access this service or what have you. And that means thinking deeply and in a thoroughgoing manner about the reputation-based systems that will be necessary to stop all the things that will undoubtedly go wrong in a situation where, oh, of course, whatever, no ID, I don't know who you are. Well, there are going to be things that will go wrong. Bad people will take advantage of those types of situations. So we need to think about reputation-based systems and how those can function. But we do not need to just leave it to daddy government. When have they ever led us astray? What could possibly go wrong with tying our national and eventually global digital ID into our ability to buy and sell? What could possibly go wrong? Anyway, if you're in a corporate report watcher or listener, you already know the very, very dire situation that we're in. But it is important to put these issues on the table because, unfortunately, as I say, most of the people around you will never have heard of an ID 2020 or know about the World Economic Forum's forays into digital identification or into the UN and how it's trying to put this forward as some sort of human right, or how this is all going to be used to tie everything together into a digital ID which will be you. And that digital ID will be regulated, it'll be tracked, it'll be controlled. It will tell you where and when you can go, for how long you can go, what you can purchase when you're there, who you can and cannot interact with. And it will be regulated at the digital ID level. If they can get you and who you are as a human being into an ID, that ID can be tracked, controlled, and regulated in any way they want. And with the programmable money and other things coming in the very near future in the form of CBDCs and the vaccines that aren't vaccines that will be required to be a human in the world, and all of the other interventions, it will all tie into digital ID. We have to understand how fundamental this is to the coming system of control, and we have to not comply. Do not start putting your entire identity into the digital space, because it will not lead in the direction of human freedom. And as even the World Economic Forum says in their own document on data intermediaries, it does start to raise the question of, can we retain our humanity? What does human agency mean when we are more and more digital beings?
At the end, what the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.